I always thought death was the final betrayal. That's what I used to believe, until I discovered someone could betray you before you even died. My name is Claire Whitmore, 35 years old, former marketing director turned boutique owner, married for 7 years to Daniel Whitmore, a man who once made me believe love could override legacy, class, and the whispering disapproval of family. We live in Fairwater Heights, a pristine neighborhood where secrets wear heels and carry Coach purses, and where my mother-in-law, Margaret Whitmore, resides just 4 blocks away. Close enough to watch, judge, interfere. Margaret is the sort of woman who's mastered the art of weaponized grace, always smiling, always polished, always reminding me in 100 subtle ways that I would never truly be a Whitmore. I was too ordinary. Too human. And yet I held on to my marriage, thinking Daniel loved me more than he feared her. Until the afternoon I found the will. It was raining, a dull Tuesday that made the walls creak like they were remembering things they'd rather forget. Daniel was in Chicago on business, and I was in the office sorting through files. The filing cabinet was jammed with tax returns, warranties, the occasional birthday card. I was looking for an old car title when I remembered the fireproof safe at the bottom of the built-in shelves. Daniel had always handled it, birth certificates, passports, the house deed. I never questioned it. But something about that day, it pulled me toward it. I texted him, "What's the code to the safe? Need to grab the Honda title." He didn't reply. After 15 minutes, I tried our wedding date. 0615, the lock clicked open. Inside were envelopes labeled in Daniel's neat handwriting. One stood out, Claire, final will and testament. At first, I was touched. It seemed like something responsible couples do. But curiosity turned into a crawling dread when I opened the envelope and read a document I had no memory of signing. It looked official, stamped, notarized, dated 6 months ago. It listed every asset in my name, my boutique, my personal accounts, even jewelry gifted to me by my grandmother. And every bit of it was to go to Daniel. No mention of my family. No charitable donations. Just a clean transfer of my life into his hands. My eyes dropped to the bottom of the page. The signature was mine. Or, it looked like mine. Almost perfect. But I know my own handwriting. I never signed this. Panic surged through me. My hands trembled as I dug deeper into the safe. That's when I found another envelope, no label, just stuffed behind folders like it didn't want to be found. Inside were printed emails, each more chilling than the last. Correspondence between Margaret and a lawyer I didn't recognize. She'd sent samples of my signature, described me as emotionally unstable, and implied that Daniel was too overwhelmed to handle legal matters. Please proceed quietly, one message read. She'll understand the need for planning. Another, my son is busy, I'm simply assisting the process. The dates were from just after my last health scare, nothing life-threatening, just exhaustion from overwork. Margaret had turned my brief vulnerability into a justification for forging my will. I didn't call Daniel. I couldn't. I didn't know if he was part of it or just complicit by silence. I called my lawyer instead, Ben Hastings, an old friend. I drove to his office first thing the next morning, clutching the envelope like a live grenade. Ben read the will, the emails, and looked up at me with something close to alarm. Claire, he said, this isn't just fraud. This is conspiracy. And if Daniel knew, it could be criminal. I asked him if I could press charges. He said yes, but only if we were sure. First, he told me to secure my accounts, change my locks, rewrite a real will, and prepare for the possibility that the people I trusted most had planned for a version of my death where I had no voice. I left his office that day not knowing who to trust, least of all the man I had promised forever to. Daniel came home 2 days later. I didn't mention the will right away. I cooked dinner, his favorite pasta, poured wine, set the table like I wasn't planning to blow our life apart. We ate in near silence until I looked him dead in the eye and asked, "When were you going to tell me your mother forged my signature?" The fork slipped from his hand. His face paled. And in that moment, I saw everything I needed to know. Not surprise. Not confusion. Just fear. Claire, he whispered, I can explain. But I already knew. He knew. And now, so did I. He said he could explain, but no explanation came. Just silence, the kind that slices sharper than words. I watched him from across the table. His lips parted, chest rising and falling, his pupils darting between my face and the table like he was trying to decide which version of the truth might still save him. But I wasn't asking for truth anymore. I was asking for the impossible, trust, after it had already been buried. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping the floor with a sound that made him wince. How long have you known? I asked. He didn't answer. You let her do this, didn't you? I said. You didn't stop her. His silence was deafening. Did you think I wouldn't find it? That I'd just die conveniently and leave you everything? He looked up at me then, finally, eyes wide with something that resembled regret, or fear. It wasn't like that, he said. Then tell me what it was like. I waited. The silence returned. I didn't ask her to do it, he finally said. She said it was a precaution. She said you'd had those fainting spells, and that she was just protecting me, protecting the family. I didn't know she went that far. But you saw the will, I pressed. You kept it in the safe. You knew it was forged. He looked down, jaw clenched. I didn't know what to do. You do nothing. That's what you do. Every time. You let her dictate everything, our wedding, our house, when we tried for kids. You handed her the keys to our lives, and now you've handed her my death. He opened his mouth, but I was already walking away, my blood burning hotter than the tears threatening to fall. I locked myself in the bedroom and didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant cough from the hallway reminded me that I was living in a house where betrayal was not only possible, it had been filed, notarized, and hidden in plain sight. The next morning, he was gone. A note on the kitchen counter, I'm staying at Mom's for a few days. We need space. The gall. Space? I laughed bitterly as I crumpled the note. He'd had years of space. Space between his spine and his decisions. Space between his loyalty and his voice. I didn't need space. I needed answers. And if I wasn't going to get them from him, I'd go to the source. I put on my coat, grabbed the folder with the forged will and the emails, and drove to Margaret's pristine white house, the one with matching flower pots and security cameras that blinked like watching eyes. She opened the door in a silk robe, pearls at her neck like it was just another cocktail party. Her expression shifted from surprise to indifference within a breath. Claire, she said smoothly, how unexpected. Not as unexpected as finding my own forged signature in your son's safe, I said, stepping past her without asking permission. She didn't stop me. She never had to. Margaret was the kind of woman who believed power didn't need to raise its voice. I dropped the folder on her granite kitchen counter. She didn't even look at it. She poured herself coffee, stirred twice, and took a delicate sip. I did what was necessary, she said at last. You were fragile, unwell. There were concerns. Concerns? I repeated. You mean those fainting spells you exaggerated to Daniel? The ones my doctor said were from overwork and stress you caused? She didn't blink. You've always been impulsive, Claire. Emotional. You let your background cloud your judgment. I had to think of my son's future. I laughed. A hollow sound. Your son's future. That's what this is about. Planning for a life without me, before I'm even gone? You wouldn't understand, she said. Some women marry into legacy. Others marry to rewrite their own story. I didn't rewrite anything, I hissed. I built this. My name. My career. Even your precious Daniel didn't have a foundation until I helped him find one. She finally looked at me then, eyes sharp. And yet, here you are. Still disposable. Still replaceable. I nearly slapped her. I didn't. I picked up the folder, looked her in the eye, and said, "You think this is over?" "This is just beginning." I left without waiting for a reply. I drove straight to Ben's office. We filed an emergency injunction on the forged will. Ben arranged a forensic handwriting expert. He contacted the estate lawyer who had notarized it, who, it turned out, had recently moved to Arizona. Interesting. Too convenient. We may be looking at more than forgery, Ben told me. There could be financial fraud, elder abuse statutes depending on how your mother-in-law manipulated the documents. Possibly coercion if we can prove Daniel knew and allowed it. My head spun. It felt like I'd stepped out of my marriage and into a crime scene. But I wasn't running. Not this time. That night, I sat on the floor of my boutique, the shop closed, the lights dim. I stared at the row of candles on the shelf, my favorites, from a local maker who always wrote a quote on the label. One read, "You'll never truly know someone until they benefit from your absence." I lit it and watched the wax pool, thinking about the woman I'd been just a week ago. Naive. Trusting. Married. I wasn't her anymore. Daniel texted late that night, "Can we talk? I miss you." I stared at it for a long time before replying. Just one word, "Why?" He didn't answer. The morning after Daniel's text, I woke up to the sound of silence. No replies. No knocks at the door. Just the familiar hum of solitude that now filled every inch of the house like fog. I didn't go back to him, and he didn't try again. Instead, I returned to Ben's office, armed with coffee, files, and a resolve sharper than any blade I'd ever had to carry. He greeted me with a grim smile. "You're not going to like this," he said, pushing a set of printed statements toward me. My bank. My name. But withdrawals I didn't authorize. Transfers I never made. "That's impossible," I said. "I have everything set to alerts." "I never saw any of these." "They were done in person," Ben replied. "Signed authorization. Not electronic. And the signatures match the one from the fake will." I didn't speak. I couldn't. My entire body went cold. "Claire, I need you to look at me," Ben said gently. "This is bigger than inheritance fraud. Someone has been slowly draining accounts tied to your business. Not just your personal checking." I felt dizzy. The boutique. The savings I'd set aside to expand next year. "How much?" I whispered. "Just over 37,000, he said. "Spread over 3 months. All done through branches near Margaret's home." The next few hours passed in a blur. Phone calls to the bank. Surveillance footage requested. Legal affidavits drafted. My name, my face, my life, all tainted by someone else's pen. It wasn't just that they forged my will. They were robbing me while I was alive. Legally, carefully, and with the cold precision of people who assumed I'd never look. I should have broken down, but I didn't. Something inside me snapped into focus instead. Grief had passed. Fear was dead. Now, I was awake. I spent the next 2 days combing through every financial document I owned. Emails. Statements. Contracts. I found discrepancies, small ones, but consistent, backdated invoices, unusual charges, references to consulting services tied to a shell company registered under a trust in Daniel's name. I called Ben. "It's deeper than her," I told him. "He's in this too. We need to talk to someone in law enforcement," he said carefully. "But Claire, you need to be prepared. If we move forward, this becomes public. Messy. Ugly. Headlines." I laughed then, sharp and hollow. "Ben, they planned for my death. They planned for me to vanish with a forged signature and a smile. I don't care how messy it gets. By the third day, I hadn't heard from Daniel, but I had heard from someone else. His cousin, Natalie, who had always been warm to me, always a little too curious about family drama. She called late at night, her voice low, urgent. "Claire, I don't know what's happening, but Margaret's been calling around, trying to convince people that you're unstable." My pulse skipped. "She said you've been erratic," Natalie continued. "That you've been making wild accusations about money and wills. She even told Aunt Louisa you were diagnosed with something. Is that true?" I swallowed hard. "No. It's not. She's building a story." "I thought so," Natalie said. "But Claire, she has allies. People who believe every word she says." I thanked her, hung up, and stood in my living room as the realization settled like ice through my spine. Margaret wasn't just trying to erase me. She was rewriting the narrative, painting me as unstable, dangerous, hysterical. She was building a defense before I ever made an accusation. Which meant one thing: she knew I was coming. The next morning, I went to her country club. Not to argue. To observe. Margaret was at her usual table, dressed in ivory, surrounded by 3 women whose faces twisted when they saw me approaching. I didn't wait for an invitation. "Enjoying the trust fund I built?" I asked her. She didn't flinch. Just looked up, serene as ever. "Claire, how lovely. We were just discussing yoga retreats." "Don't worry," I said. "You'll have plenty of time to stretch in prison." One of her friends gasped. Margaret sipped her tea. "You're making a scene. You made the scene when you forged my name and stole my money." Her composure cracked for just a moment. A flicker of panic, gone as fast as it came. "Prove it," she said, voice low. "I intend to," I replied. "And when I do, I won't just bring lawyers. I'll bring cameras. I'll bring the press. And I'll make sure the whole town knows exactly what kind of woman hides behind pearls and poison." I walked out before she could answer. The next day, she filed a restraining order. Ben called me immediately. "It won't stick," he said. "She's grasping." "But Claire, we need to file first. Make it official. Take control of the story." So we did. A full fraud investigation. A protective filing against both Margaret and Daniel. Civil action. Criminal referrals. I gave a statement to a financial investigator and handed over every piece of evidence I had. I became the woman they had feared I'd become: angry, relentless, impossible to silence. Days later, a detective showed up at my boutique. He'd pulled ATM footage. A woman matching Margaret's build and car had withdrawn nearly $8,000 using my signature. "We're opening a case," he said. "Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready since the moment I opened the safe," I told him. The next morning, Daniel showed up at my store. He looked awful. Hollow. Like guilt had carved him out from the inside. I didn't offer him a seat. He stood in the middle of the floor, hands shaking. "Claire. I didn't know it went that far," he said. "I thought it was just paperwork. I thought she was just being careful. You thought she was preparing for my death, and you let her." He flinched. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't have to want it," I said. "You just had to allow it." He broke. Right there. In front of my register. He cried like a child. But I didn't move. I didn't touch him. I had spent too many years comforting people who broke me. "They're building a case," he said through tears. "They said I could go to jail." "I didn't take any money, Claire. I swear. I signed some things, yes, but I didn't know she was pulling cash." "You knew enough," I replied. "And now, you'll live with what you didn't stop." I turned my back. He didn't follow. That night, I sat on the floor of my living room, documents spread around me, headlines in my head. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. But beneath the anger was something else, something quieter, stronger. A vow. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just truth. The truth of who I was. The truth of what they did. And the truth of what comes next. I don't know what woke me at 3 a.m., a broken dream or a warning in my gut that the storm was finally coming. I moved through the dark house without switching on the lights, barefoot, quiet, like even the walls were holding their breath. I sat down in front of my laptop and opened it instinctively. And there it was. The first article. Claire Whitmore, successful or scheming? That was the headline. Plastered across a local gossip blog that had long played watchdog for the elite. It featured my name, photos of my boutique, details of my income and supposed instability, citing an unnamed family source. According to them, I had once received treatment for anxiety, false. I was obsessed with controlling family finances, also false. And most damning of all, that I had once taken off my wedding ring during a family dinner in a moment of rage. That part was true. I remembered that night with razor clarity, Margaret telling me that a woman who can't bear children doesn't really belong in this family. So I had slipped off the ring, placed it gently on the table, and walked out. But now it was being used as evidence, twisted into a narrative that painted me as unstable and irrational. They were using my life as ammunition. Margaret had weaponized the past, leaking fragments of truth into a sea of lies. Every quote, every photo, every whisper, spun into a quiet campaign of character assassination. I called Ben. He was already reading it. They've started, he said. They want the public on their side. I let out a bitter laugh. Then let them see who I am when I've got nothing left to lose. We struck back. Ben arranged a small press briefing outside my boutique. A modest crowd. Journalists, a legal spokesperson, a few curious neighbors. I stood in front of the cameras, no makeup, hair tied back, wearing a white shirt like armor. I didn't beg for sympathy. I didn't cry. I told the truth. About the forged will. The bank transactions. The forged signatures and the stolen funds. I showed them the surveillance photos, the notarized handwriting analysis, the emails between Margaret and the estate lawyer. I don't need anyone to believe me, I said. I only need them to see the truth. The next day, the story broke wide open. It wasn't just one blog anymore. A major newspaper picked it up. A morning talk show invited a legal analyst to dissect the case. Suddenly, I wasn't the unstable wife. I was the woman who refused to be erased. But Margaret didn't retreat, she retaliated. She hired a PR firm. They released a curated video, clips of me arguing at family events, a former coworker claiming I'd been intimidating at work, someone I'd fired for stealing files. They were spinning a story, and some people were buying it. Meanwhile, the Real investigation moved forward. The police subpoenaed bank security footage, and they got it, clear, irrefutable proof of Margaret using a forged authorization to withdraw thousands of dollars from my account. We're moving this to prosecution, the lead investigator told me over the phone. Prepare yourself for a hearing. I thanked him, though the words didn't feel like victory. They felt like weight. Daniel remained silent. I hadn't heard from him since the last confrontation at my boutique. But I learned from Natalie, his cousin, that he'd hired his own attorney. She texted me a warning. Claire, I'm on your side. But they're planning to flip the narrative at the hearing. They have a voice recording. I asked what it was. She sent a clip. It was me, 3 months earlier, screaming from inside my office. If that woman touches one more thing of mine, I will burn the whole damn Whitmore name to the ground. I remembered that day. I remembered Daniel standing just outside the door. And now, he'd given them my rage as proof that I was dangerous. Vindictive. A threat to the family's legacy. But I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. Ben and I spent the week preparing for court. Every word, every exhibit, every breath rehearsed. You need to be composed, he told me. Judges are more swayed by presence than facts. I won't flinch, I said. Not this time. And I didn't. On the day of the hearing, I walked into that courtroom with my back straight and my voice steady. Margaret sat across the aisle, dressed in navy, pearls gleaming, Daniel beside her like a hollow man. I took the stand and told everything. From the safe to the will, from the withdrawals to the restraining order, from the manipulation to the gaslighting. I laid it bare. The courtroom was silent when Ben played the ATM footage, Margaret's face, unmistakable, captured in cold surveillance light. He showed the emails. The handwriting comparison. The Shell account names. I ended my testimony with this. They didn't plan for me to survive. They planned for me to vanish. But I didn't. I lived. I watched. I remembered. And now, I speak. The judge didn't issue a verdict that day. But I walked out of that courtroom knowing I had already won the first battle. Not the legal one. The personal one. The one where I refused to be afraid anymore. I had faced them all, Margaret, Daniel, the whispering public, and I hadn't looked away. I had told the truth. And that, for the first time in months, felt like power. The verdict didn't come the next day. Or the next week. It came 34 days later, in a windowless courtroom that smelled of dust and sharp ink, with a judge whose eyes revealed nothing and whose voice landed like a gavel before he ever spoke. I arrived early. Alone. I wore black, not as mourning, but as armor. Margaret and Daniel were already seated when I entered. She wore white, of course. Theatrical. Calculated. Always the victim in her own narrative. Daniel looked thinner, older. His hair was unkempt, the same suit he wore at the last hearing now crumpled at the collar. He didn't meet my eyes. I didn't offer mine. When the judge finally spoke, it was not with flair or fury. It was methodical, direct, dry as a contract. He began with the facts. The forensic handwriting report confirmed the signature on the falsified will did not match mine. Surveillance footage placed Margaret at multiple unauthorized withdrawals. The estate lawyer had confessed to processing documents under misleading pretenses, having trusted Margaret due to her long-standing social reputation and the presentation of medical documentation that labeled me unstable. False documentation. Fabricated. She had submitted forged medical letters. Forged letters. I didn't even know she had access to those. The courtroom was still as the judge turned his words to Margaret. You knowingly falsified legal documents, misrepresented the mental health of your daughter-in-law, and attempted to misappropriate her assets through manipulation and fraud. You leveraged trust, wealth, and institutional bias to silence and erase her. The court finds this behavior criminal. The sentence was swift, a recommendation for full prosecution on 3 counts of fraud, identity theft, and defamation, pending criminal charges. Civil penalties to follow. Restitution. Fines. Freezing of assets Margaret thought she'd never lose. And for Daniel? The court acknowledged failure to act, but determined he could not be proven as a co-conspirator in the fraud. Not criminally. But civilly, yes. He was now liable for half the damages tied to the financial losses, over $60,000. A ruling that did more damage to his precious pride than prison ever would. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply stood still as the words washed over me, not like water, but like steel being pulled from fire, hard, glowing, final. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed again. This time, I walked right past them. I wasn't giving another statement. I wasn't interested in applause. Justice had been served, but it wasn't sweet. It was bitter, metallic, and long overdue. I drove straight to my boutique and unlocked the door like it was any other Tuesday. My staff had decorated the window with a new theme, rebirth. Paper butterflies, blooming white lilies, and a quote painted on the glass. What tried to bury me didn't know I was a seed. Ben came in later with the official paperwork. I signed the documents calmly, my hand no longer trembling. You know, he said as he packed his bag, you didn't just win a case. You changed the narrative. I looked at him and said, no. I took the pen back. That night, Danielle showed up at my door. Not in a dramatic storm. No shouting. No tears. Just a soft knock, and when I opened it, there he was, empty-handed, empty-eyed. I just want to say thank you, he said. For not destroying me more than you could have. I stared at him. You destroyed yourself. I just stopped cleaning up after you. He asked if we could talk. I let him in, only because I needed to hear it, one last time. He sat on the edge of my couch like a man visiting a memory. I didn't know how much I depended on her voice until I realized I had none of my own, he said. I let her do it. I let her control me, control you, because I thought that's what being a son meant. And when you challenged that, I didn't defend you. I froze. I let him speak. Then I said, do you love me, Daniel? I think I did, he whispered. But I don't think I knew how. Then we're done, I replied. He stood up, slower this time, and walked out without asking for forgiveness. I didn't offer it. I didn't need closure. I had truth. That was enough. I finalized the divorce 2 weeks later. Simple, clean, no appeals. Margaret never showed up in court again. Her attorney filed a medical leave on her behalf, citing severe anxiety and public scrutiny. Irony is not always poetic, but it is precise. The story eventually faded from the headlines. New scandals took its place. But I remained. I remodeled the store. Added a small corner for survivors, handwritten notes on cards, from women who'd come in just to say, you reminded me I could speak. One day, a girl no older than 22 came in and said, I watched your story. I left my boyfriend because of it. She smiled through her tears. I hugged her without a word. Some victories are quiet. As for me? I bought a small cabin 2 hours north, by the lake. No cameras. No noise. Just a porch with room for coffee and sunrises. I go there every other weekend, just to breathe. I haven't looked at another man since Daniel, but I've looked in the mirror. And that's a love I fought hard to earn back. People still ask me sometimes if I'd go back and change anything. If I'd never married him. If I'd played along, let the family keep their secrets. And I always say the same thing, they wrote a will for my death. So I rewrote my life while I was still alive.